One. Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, having a very special guest, MT Zimny. How are you doing today?
I am so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I always like when I can get the TikTok people or Twitter people, or it sometimes I always liken it to fishing. Sometimes I throw it out there, and some people are like,
Yeah.
"Don't get the message, open it," but other people people are like, why'd you get those people on it? I'm like, well, I actually sent them a message, but they have not responded. So sometimes it's kind of going. So anytime somebody, responds and I'm able to get them on schedule wise and stuff, it feels pretty good. It feels like I'm, kind of moving forward. So I'm really glad that we could have you on today.
Oh yeah. I don't know why someone would not respond. I am like jazzed.
And then the funny thing is, I just want to say for our audience, it's funny where then I had a couple people say that, oh, I can't get my book out there. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't get it? I'm like, I sent you like four messages,
Oh
just
no,
like
no, you have to
trying.
check the DM.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. It's crazy, guys. I get people all the time. I just had another guy message me earlier, author, and he's like, "Oh, can I?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You can get on my list." I'm like, "I'm pretty booked from now for like the next 2 years probably." I'm like, "There's only so much time in the day," but
right.
I'm like, I'll never turn anybody down. I'm like, because I'm trying
Right.
to always, help people out, and I always like to also try and see where people are at. So for me, it's exciting. Like, you're at a different spot than some of the people I interviewed, a couple weeks ago and our episodes
Yeah.
ago or whatever, and then some people a couple years from now will be totally different spots. So for me, it's kind of cool
Right.
to, see alumni, kind of like move up there, and
Nice.
do some different things. So yeah, so it's really cool. But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So I really appreciate you coming on and answering my questions today and hanging out. So
Yeah.
all right, so we're gonna start right there with that first one, which was given to me by a fan a long time ago, about almost 2 seasons ago. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm sure you've heard this 10,000 times. I have loved writing since I was a kid. Um, I remember I uh, found like this old quill in my grandparents' attic. I think it was like
It's
from my
cool.
mom's wedding to sign the guest book. I was 8. I was absolutely taken. It was purple. It was huge. I loved it. And I found a piece of scratch paper and I wrote out like a little story. And then I forgot about it. And then my mom and grandma called me over and they're holding my scratch paper and they're like, "Did you write this?" And I thought I was in trouble because I always thought I was in trouble as a kid, even though I never was. Um, and I was like, yes. And they're like, "Oh, it's really good." And I think that just like was the ego boost I needed as an 8-year-old to send me down this dark path. Um, in college, I actually minored in theater, which was
Oh,
just like a very different type of storytelling that I love. I did improv comedy, and then I graduated, and I didn't really have the time or community for theater anymore, but I still really, really loved storytelling. So I started writing, and I had this awful, awful commute. Um, I worked in Seattle, but I lived on the Olympic Peninsula. And if you're from Washington, you know that that's going to be a ferry ride. And I was taking the Bremerton ferry, which is an hour long.
oh wow.
Um, it was brutal. Um, but on that ferry ride, I started like the first inklings of what would become my series, the Apex Cycle. And the first chapter of the first book actually takes place on a ferry.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
so you can see kind of um, the inspiration there. Um, it took me a while to get into writing though, because I was also trying to figure out my career as a recent college grad, and I landed at a cancer center doing data coordination, which was fine. But I had a coworker who she told me that I should write because I had told her my ideas for the Apex cycle. And when she quit, I was like, I don't want you to like leave my life because she was so wonderful. And so I would send her a chapter at a time until
Oh,
I
that's
had
cool.
a completed book. And in that time, COVID started, and Beta, the first book in the Apex cycle, became my COVID baby, I guess. I feel like everyone kind of took up a hobby. A lot of people
Oh
did like
yeah.
bread baking, and I wrote my book. Um, and by the time I got to the end, my friend, her name's Melissa, she was like, "This is wonderful. You should absolutely make it available for other people to read." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I can do that." And I looked up self-publishing, and I was like, "Yeah, that aligns with my immediate goals." And I dove straight in, got picked up by a book box almost immediately.
Oh wow.
So that was really exciting. Um, Started work on the second book, had that out in a year, and then 1 year after that, I released the third book, Xmon, and that was last December.
Oh wow.
So it's been a ride.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm saying people don't, some people might be new, so they might not understand that, like, one book a year is actually like pretty darn fast for most people. So getting, a lot of people also get stuck on, either the first or second book, for usually second book, I would notice like a gap of like 2 years. So that's pretty darn quick for, for 3 books. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that second book was the fastest of the three.
Oh wow.
And I don't
That's
know how.
interesting.
I know. Because you hear everyone talk about like second book syndrome, where the second book is
Yeah.
kind of like it lags a little typically. I don't want to pick a favorite child, but I do think the second book is my favorite. I wrote it so it came so easily.
Oh, that's
The next
awesome.
part of Samantha's story, it just clicked right into place, and I had it written in a few months, and then it was editing.
Oh, that's awesome. That's super cool. It's funny that you said like a COVID baby. I definitely feel that. I think you're just like a lot of people were forced to figure something else out. It was like you could only watch so much TV.
Oh
And
yeah,
I think a lot of people like I just talked to a friend about this. I think you just like had to, really think about what you really wanted to do. Like, and a lot of people like not only
yeah,
have the time to do that, but I think it was like bugging people, and I know for me, like I had been trying to finish something for a long time and I was like, I'm just gonna make sure I finish this draft. I was like, it's just ridiculous by this point. I had a lot of time on my hands and that's when I started to really, get more disciplined to
yeah,
finish it and that kind of thing. I'm still not done because I have to now revamp it because characters can't just do what you tell them to do, or sit in a box.
right,
They want to change. And that changes the story. But I did have the first draft done, and it's funny how many people I talk to. They're like, "Yeah, my COVID baby." I'm like, I'm trying to get my
yep,
COVID baby out there, by like next
yeah,
spring. It's special. My friend's like, "Oh, that one's a special one." I was like, "Yeah, it really is, though." And
yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned that because I've just talked to a lot of people about that. But yeah, that's really cool. Well, that's awesome that you were sending it, to your friend, and then it became something more. So that's
right.
super cool. That's
Oh,
awesome. That's a
she's
great
been such a
origin
wonderful
story.
cheerleader the whole time, and
Oh, that's awesome. It's always
but
great to have
I
those people. Yeah.
oh
Especially when
yeah,
you're
no,
like,
I don't
this isn't working and you want to hit your head into a wall or a desk or
right.
something.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I would call her up and be like, okay, spoilers for the next chapter, but I'm stuck. Like she's been just like so fantastic. I don't think these books would exist without her. So
Oh,
Melissa,
that's
I'm sure
awesome.
you are listening to this because you always do. So thank you.
That's awesome. I always tease my buddy from high school or middle school. I'm like, yeah, you're the first one
Oh
that's in
wow.
my, yeah, like in my, in my forward. And then I have like a librarian that I worked with for years. My mom actually just ran into her because we didn't know where she went because she had actually retired. And she was my original librarian. And
Wow.
my mom got to actually tell her, she's like, my son's about to publish like 4 or 5 books in like a Kindle Vella series, within the next year. And she's like, he referenced you giving him certain books as I remember
Oh
she gave me, I just talked to my students about this. We're doing a personal history project. She gave me my first fantasy book, like I would say like real fantasy, Forgotten Realms. And she's like, "Oh, I think you'd really like this at 14." And that like changed my life. And then I thought I could do
yeah.
this. So I think it was cool that my mom ran into her. So I can't wait to put her. She was like,
Yeah.
we need your actual spelling of your name so he doesn't get it wrong. But she's like, oh, that makes me feel really good. Makes me feel like, I accomplished a little bit more than I thought. And I'm like, I'm
Right.
a teacher. I'm like, I get it. But I think
Yeah.
it's cool for those people, but I think it's also cool, to be the one writing, to have people cheering you on. Cause sometimes it's very difficult
Right. Oh,
to
it can
keep
be so
going.
lonely when you're lost in a story and that
Yes. Yes. Great way to
adored.
put it. Yep.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually made a TikTok about this a while ago because I know you found me on TikTok.
Yep.
But it's like I'm not marketing my books to make money, although I would love to do this full time, and be able to support this full time. But I'm
Yeah.
marketing my books because this is a lonely, lonely fandom, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm such a nerd for these characters in this world I've made, and I just want other people to join me.
Yeah,
So
totally. Yeah. Well, that's like sometimes I feel like I'm like yelling into the void because authors are always like, well, I think some people, I would say authors, but like some people I think I like don't know that I write too and do other things. And like we were gonna do a graphic novel and then the pandemic hit, so I
yeah,
wasn't able to write it. So I'm that's like still in my back pocket. But you know, it's just like I think some people that I'm like, no, I get it. I'm like, I tried doing, you know, getting my like page, getting things out there, stories and things. I go, but it was really
right.
hard. So I said I decided to do this instead, as part of it. And then I said, then I just got really into your guys's everybody's books and characters and things. And now I'm like, my
Yeah,
wife, she's like, you're addicted. She's like, you're addicted to sharing everybody else's stuff. She goes, you just can't forget that at some point you're going to have to do that yourself. I go, I know. I said, it's
yeah,
just so many people out there that are doing great things and, you know, great books
no,
and great characters. That's why I'm always trying to do an interview. And like, she's like, oh, you get time tonight. I'm like, all right, see ya.
sweet.
So yeah, so you know, it's hard with the little one now, but when I can get them in, I
Oh
try
yes,
to get them in. But yeah, I do agree with you. It's lonely, and that's why I like podcasting because it makes me feel like I'm not so lonely on my island or in my
yeah.
office, you know, writing or on my laptop or
No,
my
it's
phone. So
it's great. I think it's great that you're running this podcast for so many authors, especially indie authors, because we all just want to talk and nerd out about our books.
yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes I'm just like, I was just talking about this the other day. I was like online, I was like, I just want to help people sell their books. I was like, can people just subscribe, share, like? I was like, I'm not selling anything myself. I'm like, I'm just trying to get people that you enjoy, you know, their books and things. And but just to get somebody to subscribe to YouTube, it's really hard. And I'm like, I only
Oh
send
yeah,
one, you know, like I said, I send four a month, you know, and I'm like, it's almost impossible to get people, you know, to do that. So I totally get, you know, where someone's got to buy your product and I'm not even buying, you know, selling a product. So it's crazy, you know,
yeah,
that you know, not monetarily. So it's I get it. Like I totally understand. Like it's really hard. But that's where I always tell people like please review because that's, you know, in the long
yeah.
run,
Those
that's what,
reviews
you
they
know,
do
that's
so
what gets
much.
people. So yeah, which is
Yep.
funny because I don't look at reviews at all. But I know a lot of people do. So
They do, they do. I've had times when I've been at a Barnes and Noble doing a signing, and I've had people come up and they're like, "Yeah, I've been kind of lurking in that corner over there. I wanted to look you up first before I came over here, but I saw you had good reviews." So I was like, "Reviews work."
it's crazy for me because I'm a blurb guy, like cover, blurb, and you know that's like and like I'll look at the author's site, and if you're like if you have like you know the like or like the cover, like I don't like the Amazon profile, different things where I'm like, oh, this is my kind of person, you know, like we could be nerd friends, you know. That's where
Yeah,
I'm more that to me is means more than a you know than you know because like some people than a rating because you know some people like they you know crush your ratings by being like, oh, the book got to me crease. And it's like, well, that's not your fault, you know? And I'm like, I want to know what the story's
yeah,
about, you know? And if you have an interesting premise, I'm like, I'm there. I'll read it, you know? Like if you can keep me entertained for the first 50 pages, to 100 pages spent on the length, I'm like, I'm down. That's my friend. He's like, you have too
yeah,
many
yeah.
books on your Kindle. I'm like, that's fair because I don't look at ratings.
Can't
But
have too many.
I encourage people to, you know, to actually just look at, you know, what an author has done you know, because you know, so, and not Brandon Sanderson, you know, like I wasn't really into
Oh
the first
yeah,
Mistborn book, and now I'm getting into it, you know, and I'm glad I stuck with it. You know, I think it kind of took me a while to get going. It was different from Aloe of Law and Warbreaker, and you know, but I'm glad I stuck
mm.
with it. But you know, if I had looked at the reviews, you know, like there's plenty of horrible reviews on there. You know, I think he's
Oh
got more
yeah,
positive, you know what I mean? But like, it's just kind of interesting, to me to when people kind of talk about that. But yeah, it's always
oh yeah.
interesting. Speaking of the reviews, though, and you know, just those kind of obstacles, I'm curious, what is one of the major obstacles that you've had to overcome in your career so far, and what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I know it's hard to pick one.
So I
You're
know
like, I'm
I
an indie author, Dan. Like, my whole life
it's
is an
all
obstacle
yeah.
in this career.
It's an obstacle course.
Yeah, it really
But
is.
the first obstacle that comes to mind was being pregnant.
Oh,
I
that's a good one. That's a good one.
that's yeah. I have a 7 month old, so I know you understand. And I was pregnant for most of the time I was working on Epsilon, the third book,
Wow.
and it is tough. It is tough to get done with your your 8-hour work day and then tell yourself, I'm going to go write, and then immediately pass out. Because I don't think, if you've never been pregnant, you do not understand the fatigue that comes with it. You could fall asleep anywhere. So that was a daily battle.
Yeah.
Uh, just, and then, I mean, you hear people talk about pregnancy brain, which is definitely a thing.
I'm looking at my wife right now.
Oh, it's bad. Like I would reread over sections and be like, this is absolute nonsense. And while I was pregnant, my friend Melissa, I spoke of earlier, was also pregnant.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so we were just two pregnant ladies trying to make our way through this final book.
That's awesome.
And I did make it. When you have a due date for a baby, it kind of gives you a pretty hard deadline for a book to come out,
That's fair.
because once that baby shows up, there's not much else that's going to be done for a couple months,
Yep,
as
that's for
you
sure.
know.
Yeah.
But I did it. I got it done. I got it edited. I got some extra people to help who weren't pregnant, um, and they were huge helps with feedback. We got it nice and edited, and I was able to have my big release event at my local Barnes and Noble, and we did it. So
Oh,
um,
that's awesome.
it was a lot, and it's the third book. If you ever get around to it, there's a lot of themes of like parental duty.
Mm.
So I'm wondering what might have been on my mind.
That's awesome.
So, but other than that, I mean, obviously everyone's going to say marketing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally.
Marketing is just a nightmare always, as we've already
Yeah.
kind of touched on.
Yeah, yeah. I said to my wife a while back, because like I got home and I just kind of like, other than writing and like a couple things like reading lately, like with the Kindle challenge, I'm really getting into the Kindle challenge because it's really like the only thing I can do, because like my son, like our situation was like kind of reversed. Like my wife like really had a hard time. So like she was really, like well, I mean everyone has a hard time, but like she like really like couldn't do a lot with my son, because she was taking care of herself and she had to get healthy. So for me, it was like interesting. So I was with him more, and I felt like, she did a lot, she was breastfeeding and stuff. But other than that, I mean, she was just so wiped. So I just said to
Yeah,
her the other day, I was like, I just do not know how any female author does this. I was like, I always knew it was really difficult, but I was like, I just like seeing her go through everything. I was just like, I don't know how anybody gets anything done, let alone, these mom
yeah.
authors. I was like, I just give you guys a lot of credit, because I'm like, I can barely get
Thank you.
stuff done. And like, and my friend, he's like, oh, you have it pretty rough. I was like, no, I didn't have the baby. I'm like, my wife is still
Yeah,
trying to recover, 9 months later. And they say 9 months in, 9 months out. But, then with her, or if you have, complications and stuff, and like you're talking about even longer, or, C-section and stuff. And I'm like, I just
yeah,
don't think people really realize that. So it kind of does irritate me a bit, now, especially when I see people, I had somebody like who had just recently, had a baby and had published a book, and, somebody was like being very crass, I would say, with, just, it's fine if you don't like a book, like it's fine. But I
yeah.
just said it was like in a group thing, and I was just like, I was like, she just she had a baby, I'm like, and,
Yeah,
I had a C-section. And, I was like, the fact that the book came out when, that author said it was going to come out, and she did her best. I was like, maybe we could
yeah,
just remember people are people.
yeah.
So yeah, but it's just, I give you guys credit, because I don't, I said to my wife, I was like, I don't know how any mom author does this. It's like I have like
I
nothing left at the end of the day, and then I somehow get something down in 15 minutes a day now. But I was like, it's same thing. It's like garbage, and I'm like, I didn't have a baby, so I don't know how you
yeah.
guys do it. So like, I just wanted to point that
Nope.
out. Yeah, so I definitely give you guys a lot of credit there. I don't know how you guys
Thank
do it.
you.
So yeah. And how is your baby doing, by the way?
Oh, she is fantastic. I can hear her
Yeah.
out there right now giggling with my mother-in-law. So she's having a great time.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
She's I actually like to joke that she was my ticket to being a full-time author, because childcare is so expensive that
It
I
really is.
my
Yeah.
job.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
now it's like, all right, well, if I do my chores really, really fast, I have half of nap time to do some writing. And so far
Yeah,
it's working out pretty well. So
yeah. My wife's
And she's
always
cute,
teasing
so
me.
there's that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My wife always sees me. She's like, "You, if you could stay home and she was like, we could finance you right now, like stay home, you watch him and write." She goes, "I know you would." I was like, "Oh,
Oh
it's just
yeah.
been my." I was like, "It's my dream." I was like,
Yeah,
I would love to be a
it's
stay-at-home
great.
dad and just yeah, just if I have a babysitter come by for 3 hours, I'm like, I can bust out like 10,000 words in 3 hours. I was like,
Amazing.
yeah, I was like, just having somebody come over. I was like, that just I know author, she's been doing that for a while, and she's been really successful at it. So ever since I heard her talk on a podcast about it and I asked her privately, I was like, oh, that's just been my
Yeah.
dream for the last 2 years. But yeah, I feel
Yeah.
you there. Yeah,
I
that's
get my
awesome.
mother-in-law on Friday, so it's
Oh, cool. Oh, that's
that's also
awesome.
nice. Sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes it's for me though and not for writing. I just
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
wish.
definitely understand that. We have a dinner tonight with some friends. I'm so exhausted. My wife's like, "Do you want to go? Do you want to come to dinner?" And I'm like, Yes, because I just
Yeah.
know that everybody else's kids are older, and so they want to hold my baby, and I'm like, I love him, but I was like,
Yep.
he's like 22 pounds. He's a big kid, so
Ooh,
it's like it's just kind of nice to get to
yep.
pass him around a little and sit. So I totally get that. So I was like,
Oh yeah.
yes, we're going to dinner at someone's house. Like that's funny,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
but for our audience, what genre or genres do you currently write in and why?
So I write young adult. And my one series that I do have published is young adult superhero. But I really wanted to get into the young adult scene because when I was, that target age group, books were everything to me.
Yeah.
They they were what kept me going through. I mean, high school's rough for everyone. And then when I was in high school, my grandma died, and she was my
Oh,
best friend, and we loved reading together. And so it was just such a formative time in my life. And those authors I was reading became so hugely important to me
yeah.
that I want to be that for someone else.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, or even if it's like healing my inner 16-year-old a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think with young adult, I think it gets pigeonholed a lot
Mm.
to, oh, this is going to be for 15-year-old girls who want to see Edward and Bella get together. Um, but honestly, like the the world is your oyster with young adult. I have enjoyed an audience from middle schoolers all the way up to a couple of 80-year-old men who are so enthusiastic about these books. And it's because a lot of the themes that young adult touches on eh, resonate with anyone. Um, in particular, mine, I go into the theme of belonging and kind of finding yourself. And who among us hasn't had to deal with trying to figure out your own way in the world?
Mm.
Um, I think like young adult is like, I don't know, it touches on something that's so integral to every person, even if we like to pretend that we have outgrown it. Um, but we all have an inner child.
Yeah.
So it's just such an important, special genre to me. And then, of course, superhero, because superheroes are cool, man.
That's fair. Well, I just want to point out you kind of said something. Well, you said something really interesting. I just want to kind of think about loud, but like I think that the young adult, I think you're on the right track there. Like I think that young adult really resonates with a lot of people because like certain people, like maybe these 80-year-old men, maybe that's very nostalgic for them, like a nostalgic time,
Yeah,
and I think that I like certain movies like that, like there's just certain movies that like I'll watch and I'm like, oh, this makes me think of high school or when I watched them with my
yeah,
friends or or whatever, or
hmm,
maybe the people in them are going through similar experiences, things like that. So
right.
I do think you hit a wide audience there. I love the John Flanagan Ranger's Apprentice series. Those are
Hmm.
young adult. He's got the Royal Ranger Apprentice series, or like where the guy's daughter takes over. Just yeah, just awesome stuff. And I think there's just so many different topics, like you said, there's so many different ways you can go. And I think
Yeah,
yeah, you hit a wider audience that way. But I love when people say they're like, oh, young adult. I'm like, oh, I'm like you don't know anything about young adult. I'm like, you're thinking
yeah,
middle grade, maybe middle grade now, some
right.
higher middle grade, that kind of thing. And I just want to also mention Team Jacob. But anyways, yeah, superheroes are awesome. So yeah, it's definitely
Yeah,
definitely a good genre. I always loved when I saw your TikTok at first, though. I was like, what I saw it and I saw it and it was at the time where it was like I was really slammed because my son was almost born and I was
Mm.
pretty new to TikTok, so I was like trying to like follow you or whatever, or like save it, so I could come back to it later. 'Cause that's what I always do for future
Right.
podcast leads and stuff. And I was like, what is her genre? And I was like, I love the cover. And then when I was like, oh, I was like, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to me it like really, yeah, and I love the blurb, especially for book one. So I felt like, yeah, I
Yeah.
felt like young adult and superhero. I was like, I just didn't think of that as I feel like a lot of people, I was just talking to another superhero like genre author about this privately, and he was like, yeah, well, it's still not many of us out here, even though there's Marvel, he's like in terms of
Yeah.
books,
Yeah.
and I know Jeffrey H. Haskell and I had spoken about it in our first interview with like his series and everything. He has two of them. But it's just it's interesting to me, and I'm thinking like young
Right.
adult, and I don't know. I think you have some really cool themes, that can appear in your book, particularly between young adult and superhero. So I
Oh
don't know.
yeah.
I hadn't considered that. So now I'm like, oh, I'd love to do that at some point. It was very inspirational in terms of thinking like, I think that's why so many people love Peter Parker, as a teenager.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, so I really think you
Oh
touched
yeah.
on a great crossroads of two genres
Yeah.
there. So I think that was really smart. But
It was a blast to write high school superheroes. I
yeah,
it's it has all of like the angst and like the classic issues you run into with high schoolers. You have bullies, you have Spanish finals in there. Um, but then you have all this added like what am I doing with superpowers? And then the poor main character has no powers, which really is I mean, again, it's such a thing I think everyone has felt at some point. Like I am not enough, but I want to prove to everyone that I am, and like that is absolutely what she's trying to do. Um, it is a really fun intersection to be working at. And then of course, like I add in a little bit of ancient Greek and Roman flavor, a little bit of Viking in there, which makes no sense until you read them. But
say if people don't like that, this is probably not the podcast for you. I feel like we talked a lot about those different themes and like mythology seems to be. I said I don't. I people ask me that they like your episodes. Like I have people like editing and listening and stuff between now and when they come out. So some people are like, "You guys are really on a mythology theme lately." I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I just got a lot of authors that have been going with it. I was like, I do the same thing all the time because I teach history. So
nice.
I was like, it's just interesting, and I think
It
it's that
is.
unbreakable thing, where Samuel L. Jackson's like, you're really looking at, mythology having that bit of truth to it, and I think
Yep.
it always just sounds so cool, and particularly when you're talking about superheroes, and there's just so many
Yeah.
cool things, yeah, and I know somebody a while back and I were talking about like, well, what if Hercules really was that strong, and then that's where the mythology comes from. And I know some people have written
Yeah.
their, stories from that aspect, which is really cool. So I think it's just such a cool genre. Like, that's why you write in it, it's such a cool genre. There's
Oh
so
yeah.
many things
Oh
you can
yeah.
do. And yeah, and then a little bit different than your typical sci-fi, and fantasy. And, I think there's,
Mhm.
certain tropes and things like that that are really fun. But I gotta say,
Yeah.
you brought up Spanish Final. I think I'd be way more as a superhero, way more, reticent to take a Spanish final than fight a bad guy. I'd rather go fight a bad guy, I think, than take a
Well, the main
Spanish
character is
final.
equally bad.
Oh, that's awesome. It's really funny. Yeah. Well, yeah, not now I'm like terrified. That might be like my new my new main fear. But so
Oh
speaking
no.
of your speaking of your books, what are your Apex Cycle books about and how did you come up with this idea? It's like my favorite
Oh
question.
yes. Okay. So the Apex cycle is a trilogy. The books are Beta, Delta, and Epsilon. And in Beta, we see Samantha, who's a high school sophomore, and she's moving to this man-made island city called New Delos with her family. And New Delos is known for having a higher than average population of Apex. And Apex is just a fun word that means superhuman. Um, Samantha is not an Apex. She is what one might refer to rudely as a beta. So there's and even though she's completely ordinary, someone is immediately trying to kidnap her as soon as she moves to this island. And when her roommate gets kidnapped, she blames herself and decides to remedy the situation. She's going to try to join the secret superhero team she's uncovered at her high school that is, of course, ran by her history teacher, who else?
I like it.
And from there, she tries her best with varying degrees of success. It's again the first book sort of follows her quest to get back her roommate and her trying to join the team. And it's fun when you have superheroes because you're playing with secret identities and you're playing with, I mean, secrets in general. There's a lot of twists in there. Some of them are more obvious than others. And at the end of Beta, it takes a hard left turn.
Mm.
So then it's hard to talk about the next two books
Yeah,
without giving away. But essentially, she goes on to sort of lead this fight against this villain named Adrestus, who he wears this Spartan armor. He's working from the shadows with a league of villains. They are kidnapping people. We're trying to figure out why and what for. And like all good villains in any superhero story, he is going for world domination. So it's, will Samantha be able to stop him in the end? Only one way to find out.
that's like I can't remember who said that recently because they just got done with their trilogy. They're like, it's the trilogy conundrum, I think they called it on here. You know, where once you get all three books, now you have to like sell them, but you also can't give away book one
Yes.
and the ending. And it just keeps reoccurring. I'm
Oh,
like, I always forget about that, the trilogy
it's
conundrum.
so hard. It's like I know if I like gave away the twist, I would have people like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm really into that. But I'm not willing to give away the twist. Like it redefines the whole the whole first book and then defines the next two books. But that's about as unvague as I can be on that.
And see, that's where like my wife, that would drive her nuts. That to me, like she doesn't like surprises. I love surprises. So that to me, like, especially from like a writer standpoint, I'm like, oh, how did you do that? Like, where was that premise? Like, how was that premise written? And, was that promise fulfilled? So as a reader and a writer, to me, that just makes it like twice as like now I have to read it twice as fast and get to it twice as quickly because now I have to see what you're
Yeah.
talking about because it drives me nuts. And I think as a history teacher, I want to know. I love mysteries, but I also want to solve them.
Yes.
So now I have to be like, oh, what are you talking about there? Yeah, that's really cool. Well, he sold me. That's for sure. So hopefully
Oh,
we'll
good.
sell some others. I actually think I
Thank
have.
you.
I think I have the first book in my queue. Actually, I just with my
Oh,
little one,
nice.
it's been hard to it's been hard
Yeah,
to
yeah.
read.
No, understandable.
Last night was like I was like, oh, I'm gonna get like 30 pages done when he sleeps, and then he didn't. So I was like, got three. So I've been trying to get caught up during the day today, but it was a little harder at work
No.
and stuff. Yeah, my wife's like, she
Yeah.
used
No,
to read
it's
like
been
60
hard to
books in
like
a year.
read.
Yeah.
Whew,
Well, it's hard to read and write
that's
with
a
a
lot.
kid. Like, yeah, to do both, it's like to
Yeah.
do one is hard. To do both, I feel like
Right.
is like even
Right.
harder. So yeah. I like got
Yeah.
nothing read before he was here because I was writing all the time. So
Right. No, my reading list is always a little embarrassing when people are like, oh, I read 100 books this year, and I'm like, I read 7,
but
but
that's
I
a really
wrote
good
one.
accomplishment. Yeah, that's like really good though. If people don't get that, that's really good when you have a baby, like
Yeah.
that's a lot of time there, like spent on one thing. But in fact, yeah, like my friend, he's like I'm really into this video game. And I'm like, how do you hold the thing with your kid there? And he's like, oh,
Right.
this is the I'm like, mine just wants to I love him. He's my little buddy. And so like he just wants to hang with me. So that's how
Yeah.
I usually read or write is when he goes to sleep. It's
Yeah.
been a long,
Yeah.
long week of teething, so it hasn't happened quite as much.
Oh, I
But
feel
my
you
friend,
there.
my friend's like, oh, his kids are like 4 and 5, so I feel like
Yeah.
he's a little bit he's in that position, where they're kind of doing their own thing now. So,
Hmm.
but I'm
Yeah.
definitely enjoying my cuddle time. So I trying
Oh,
to get the
yeah.
writing in when I can and the reading. But that's what my
Right.
wife, she's like, do you want me to? I'm like, he just wants to hang. I'm like, I can read and write. I was like, I'll be reading and writing when he doesn't want to hang out anymore. I'm like,
Right. He's only gonna
that's
be this little one.
exactly. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's funny. Well, those sound awesome. I mean, that's actually why I asked you on because I've been doing a lot of research on your books and looking at a lot of reviews and
Oh,
stuff. So that's why I got book one. But I just found it interesting, in terms of your definition for like Apex and beta. That just like sounded really cool. I always love when somebody does something unique, within the superhero genre or, fantasy or sci-fi, where it's like,
yeah,
oh, that's then it switches it around a bit, and I like how, your main character, doesn't have powers, and
yeah,
that's like, everybody can get powers, I think, in the superhero
right.
genre. I want to know, I want the story of the person that doesn't have them. And to me,
Yes,
like that's just really unique. So that's what like drew me in, into, your blurb and everything. And I was checking out
yeah.
reviews for it. I'm like, that's a really cool idea.
And they
But
come with the promise that she never
yeah,
gets powers. Like that's always
yeah,
everyone's like, oh, there's a big twist. She gets
yeah, yeah.
powers, doesn't she? And I'm like, no, come on, have more faith
It
in
makes
me
it
than
even
that.
better. Yeah, yeah. No, that I think from a writer standpoint and a reader standpoint, that makes it even better. I mean, I think there's so much out there for people like that, like you can go do that because there's plenty of that out there. But I
Oh
want the
yeah,
story where she doesn't get powers and how does she, you know, you know, how does she survive in this world, let alone, with these people and to do these things. So I think that is very, very interesting. But that leads me to my fifth question. So we talked a bit about what an apex is. But I was curious at
yeah,
like what sort of powers that they have. Like, do they have one? Could they have multiple? Like, I was kind of curious how you went about that in terms of world building for your superheroes.
yeah. So coming up with the powers was one, a lot of fun, and two, really, really hard.
I feel
You
that.
run into a wall really fast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, people don't get that. Yeah.
um, for the most part, people will have, if they are an apex, they have one power, but that
Mm,
power can have multiple facets to it.
okay.
So the male lead in these, he's basically a Superman-esque kind of character. He's super strong. He has super senses. Uh, he is not super durable though,
Mm,
which sort of leads to him getting injured quite a bit when you're super strong, but if you don't have a body that can necessarily withstand being beat up.
yeah, yeah.
um, so that's fun. Almost every power in there comes with like that flip side of the coin. So another main character, she's an empath, but she can't turn it off.
Mm,
And because she's an empath and these powers work genetically, her mom's an empath. And you discover in the second book that she hasn't seen her mom in several years because they can't get near each other because it creates a feedback loop, like when you hold two microphones too close to the speaker. So it's like unbearable to be close to each other, and neither of them can stop it. Um, so it's really, really fun to play with, not just like what can these powers do, but how are they hindering the holder of the powers.
yeah, yeah.
Um, another another really fun way I came with the powers is like by necessity. There's one character, I won't go too far into him, but he has a little bit of a redemption arc. And there's this moment he has near the end of the second book. And when I first came up with his character for the first book, I knew that moment was going to happen. And I knew that for this, sorry, this is so vague, but for this moment, I needed him to be telekinetic.
Mm,
Um, so I was luckily able to have the foresight to give him telekinesis like right at the beginning,
oh,
because I
nice.
knew his redemption arc would bring him to a moment of telekinesis.
Mm,
So that was kind of fun. Um, and then, like the main character Samantha, I do have some characters who just like aren't Apex. So you find out that the history teacher who's in charge of the team, he's not an Apex, and 100% it is because while I was writing it, I got to the point where Samantha was asking, "Hey, what's his power?" And I drew a blank. I could not think of any more powers. I was
interesting.
so tired
Yeah, yeah.
of giving powers to characters, and I was like, you know what? He doesn't have power. But that became so important for the rest of the series because now he is like a true mentor to Samantha because he doesn't have powers. He had to go through like the same uphill battle that she's now going through. Um, and it shaped his entire arc as well as Samantha's. So that was, kind of worked out. Um, but now the powers are, some of them are scary. Some of them it's like coercion, right?
Mm.
You find one character discovers that he'll just say, hey, I want you go get me a soda, and you have to go get him a soda.
Mm.
So it's a good thing he's a good guy, but then it's like, what happens if he switches sides?
Yeah.
The villains have powers. Um, I think there's only one. Oh no, there's a couple characters who have like physical differences. I think there's a minor character who has gills, so he can
Mm.
breathe underwater, and then there's a minor villain who has wings. And she's fun because she has like 4 wings. So yeah, they're kind of all over the board.
I was just curious because
But
like it's always interesting. Well, you bring up again with the like Vedas and things, and it's cool that the history teacher doesn't have powers. I don't either, but it still makes me feel good. Like I could run a superhero, group. Um,
yeah.
but I don't know. I always found like I love Superman. Don't get me wrong, Captain America's great, but I am so into Marvel's like Captain America with Sam Wilson now and Anthony Mackie
Mm,
because he chooses not to have the serum. And
right.
that is just like, I was like, why would you do that? As a fan at first, but as a writer, I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, the training sequence in
Hmm.
Falcon and Winter Soldier where he finally
Yeah.
gets it, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And I think that's why I've always really liked Batman and Wildcat from DC.
Mm-hmm, hmm.
Like they don't have powers. Hawkeye, Oliver Queen, Green Arrow,
Yeah.
like they always really fascinated me, like why would these people who don't have powers, like do what they
Yeah.
do with these people? Like they could get annihilated any minute by
Oh
Darkseid or
yeah.
Thanos or whatever, Black Widow too, Natasha. Like
Yep.
it's like, man, it's just always I don't know. But as when I get older, I'm like when I was younger, I was like, oh, that's lame. But now as I get older, I'm like,
Right.
wow, I'm like those are really good stories. And some of the comics I read for them too were just
Yeah.
because the writer has to think of a different way to solve those problems than
Right.
just bashing them in like Superman. That's, one of the things I
Right.
dislike about Superman at times, is that that's all they do, or he can do
Right.
anything, but how do you make him, unique or that people can relate to? So to me, that's
Right.
really cool because I think everybody can relate to your character, and her and not being able to have powers, and um, I think also again adding that young adult aspect in there, like
Hmm.
you do feel powerless at times, to
Yeah. Oh
what's
yeah.
going on, around you. So I think that's just really cool. So I think in terms of a writing aspect, I think that was just such a good move by you personally. I think that was very unique and gives you a lot of opportunity, as an author, do some really cool things that a lot of people don't
Yeah.
get to see too often, particularly young adults. So,
I like to say I was inspired by how bad I was at sports in
mm.
high school. Um, I was very, very bad at sports, but boy, did I try. And that is definitely Samantha's entire story.
Mm. And
She's
I feel like a lot of
definitely,
people would feel that. Yeah. Yeah.
oh yeah, like I have 3 siblings. They're all incredibly athletic. They were all like captains of every team they were on,
Mm.
and really good at everything. And I had half my PE class mad at me because I couldn't catch a ball when I was on first base. Like, so that is, a lot of that fueled Samantha's
Yeah.
lack of powers. But also with the powers, I actually my, my degree is in human physiology.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool.
so I don't know like how much of it shows through the actual books because a lot of that kind of technical stuff gets edited out, unfortunately. But definitely approached it from like that human physiology aspect
That's
of like
awesome.
what's going on with these characters. I talk about the biology of like the genetics at one point in the book. And anyone who's taken a bio 101 class or a genetics class, they're going to be like, oh yeah, no, I see what she's doing. Um, so it was really, really fun to like kind of take that aspect of my background and work it
Yeah.
into these characters and their powers.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's awesome. I think that's why my buddy, he's really, I mean, he's I don't think what's called. Oh, he like, does all the NCIS stuff, used to for the
Mm,
Navy. And I think now he's doing like mortician stuff. But yeah, he was always fascinated, by, just like, biology and anatomy just in general.
yeah,
So he was really into X-Men because of, that there were certain runs where they really, went into that. So I definitely, he was telling me about it. I was like, I had a greater respect for the X-Men writers, after he explained certain things to me. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that's what
yeah,
they were doing. I was like, that's super cool,
yeah.
that they're really trying to, put in, real science. They change things, but it's interesting
Oh
that they
yeah, no,
tried
you
to
got
put
it.
like a science or, their own magic system of science, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, in terms of X-Men. But yeah, that's super cool.
Well, that's
Well,
what's fun. That's like I do have a bit of like a magic fusion in there.
that's cool.
Because while I try to be like super scientific with these powers and how they work and where they come from, I do have like an origin story of where the first Apex came from, and
Oh, that's awesome.
it does play a large role in the plot, and it is essentially magic. I don't use the term philosopher's stone
Hmm.
because that is associated with so many huge things in media already. So I
Yeah.
actually just use I call it the um, the lapis because that's Latin for stone. Um, but I have a whole backstory with the original Adrestus, who was immortal, and his source of immortality, he was able to create new Apex, or the first Apex, and then from them, all other Apex have descended from. And you find out that there's a bit of truth to the history or to that legend that's been
Oh, that's cool.
told in this world. So, and maybe that magic rock comes into play.
Oh, that's cool. That's
So
super cool.
it's fun. It's fun to mix science with magic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think anytime you can, it ends up creating some very interesting and cool things. So yeah, I definitely agree there. All right, so hardest question I think so far. If you could have any superpower from your books, which would it be and why?
Okay, this is a very, very tricky question. And I've narrowed it down to two. And one of them is a character that I think we see mentioned like twice, and he's the one with the gills. But he's a freshman on the team, and he can breathe underwater. And there are so many times when I would like to just go hide in a kelp forest and chill. Like I
That's
think that
fair.
sounds like the most relaxing place. It's just like float a bit and just no one's gonna find me. It's gonna be
Yeah, yeah.
quiet, just gently rock. But more practically, there's a character named Heather, and she has um, like a shadow based powers, and she can travel
Mm.
between shadows.
Oh, that's
And I
cool.
hate traffic, so make my closet nice and dark. Step inside, and I can travel within a reasonable distance to somewhere else that's nice and dark. And I think that would be extremely useful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
That's super cool. I have a Shadow Walker and I did like a whole D&D because I'm doing like a sword and sorcery like Kindle Bella series. And it's like a buddy cop thing between him and this war priest. And so I had him do like a Shadow Walker. And it was so
nice.
hard to come up with cool powers at certain levels and then put them into seasons, and be like, oh, and
Yeah.
I want the D&D aspect in there. So I was just like, how am I gonna do this? But yeah, I actually went to a lot of like I went to a lot of the Nightcrawler comics and stuff like that,
Oh,
to really
nice.
figure out, yeah, like, and just
Yeah.
to figure out, like distances and things like that, and some
Hmm.
things like, he was saying and Mystique said about, similar powers and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
the shadow ones are always really cool to me. I was fascinated by
Oh, yeah.
them. So yeah, it's super cool. It's a
Well, it's
great
fun because
answer.
like the character herself is like super girly, and so it's fun to make like this kick-ass character who then like has a giant bow in her hair. And
That's
it's like
awesome.
I like to make characters whose femininity isn't threatened or undercut by their just immense power. So that's fun.
Oh, that's cool. I like though that you said that she has the shadow powers, because that's really cool, because that's like an interesting contrast, like I always like the heroes with like the TV show, where like she's the, what's her name, Hayden Panettiere or whatever, where
Oh,
she's the
with
cheerleader, but then
the cheerleader, yeah,
yeah, but she had her, I think her power was interesting, she wasn't like
right,
all sunny disposition and stuff, she like really, it really went towards her trauma and like
right,
I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. So I think you got a really good, interesting combination there going, kind of, I think we'd say like almost like opposite sides of the spectrum, in terms of personality, things like that. So that's like really cool.
Yeah, it's fun
So
to play with.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's
So,
really cool. All right. So if you could fight any villain from your books, who would it be and why?
so first of all, most of the villains would probably just destroy me. If I was fighting to win, I would want to fight. She's not even a villain per se. She's just absolutely horrible. She's
Ooh, even
one of
better.
Samantha's classmates,
Oh,
and she's
nice.
not an Apex. And she's her daddy's rich, and she wants everyone to know it. She's she's a bully. She's vindictive. She's so much fun to write. And I do think I could take her in a fight because she is a 16-year-old girl. That said, I know my ego would take a hit because she knows how to hit someone where it hurts verbally. Um, I would prefer to fight the main villain because he's so horrible that I do not care if he takes me down. Someone needs to punch that man in the face. Um, but he again would absolutely wreck me.
She'd be like your starter villain, and then once you defeat her,
Yes,
then you can
yeah,
kind of like move up from there, like Scott Pilgrim, like versus the world or something like that.
exactly. Yes, you get it. I would actually not say no to a bake off against him. He is
Mm,
a avid baker, as am I.
oh,
Um,
nice.
so I'm like, okay, maybe I could stand a chance if I make my chocolate chip cookies. Like, and then when he loses, he will absolutely kill me because he's mad. But that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I will have that moment of
Awesome.
triumph.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. Where they had, I love to see there's like picture of that where they had you the ribbon instead of him, and he just is like furious. Like
Oh yeah, no, immediately stabbed. Everyone's dead.
that's awesome.
He's
Super
got a
good.
little bit of a ego problem. So
Yeah, yeah. It's fair. It's awesome. So we're wrapping up here, but do you have any news, updates, or current projects that you can share with us before we go?
nothing pressing because again, I have a 7-month-old who's taken up most of my time, but I do have some things in the works.
Oh,
I
cool.
did just start break ground on a new series,
Oh,
so
cool.
stay tuned for more information on that. And I am hoping, fingers crossed, to get an audiobook out for beta within the next 6 months.
Oh, oh, that's awesome.
So that would probably be the bigger one, just some logistics stuff that I'm working out with that, but I do hope to have it available. And in the meantime, everyone can follow me. I'm most active on TikTok, as we said. I like to go on there and be cringy quite a bit, but I'm also on Instagram. I am on Twitter or X, but once that paywall goes up, I'm gone.
Yeah,
So
that's what trying to transfer everybody over. I feel that. I try to get to
yeah, you can
all
find
the
me on Blue
things.
Sky.
Nice. Nice.
I'm on Thread. I don't know if anyone's active on Thread. Um, but you search MT Zimny, there's no E in Zimny. I will pop up pretty much anywhere.
Awesome. Well, I just want to remind our audience, in case you're new, you can always find every author or creator or director, anybody we have on, you can actually find their social links, their product links. You can find, we can find your book links in this description, all three of them, and that way you can go and check those out. Please make sure also that, like, Mary said, in terms of Audible, we're mentioning this quite a bit because I think people forget, that Audible is not, as of right now, is not connected with Amazon Kindle or Goodreads. So Amazon and Goodreads, Kindle are connected, but not Audible. So if you are reading or listening to books on one of them, but not the other, I do both usually. I just really like the experience of reading and then listening to see if I missed anything or deepen my understanding of the book or the characters. Um, I don't know. I just always make sure I do both because again, it helps out everybody, with those products. It doesn't just help out also authors, helps out the artists, the voice actors. We have a couple of voice actors coming on this season, so I want to make sure that, people are remembering it helps everybody, in terms of those reviews. So please make sure, you guys are doing that, particularly, for indie authors and, creators, it's really how people live and breathe. And if you want more products from them, it's probably the best thing to do is to help them so that way you get them. I always tease my friend Christopher G. Brenning. He's always like, "Oh, you're helping me out." I'm like, it's not altruism. I'm like, I want more books. So I'm like just trying to make sure he gets more books. So, but thank you so much for coming on today. I love, like I said, anytime I can get somebody on TikTok's like my new one where in threads I'm really trying to get people to come on. So anytime where I can get
TikTok's
people,
fun. TikTok's fun.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have a couple of superhero writers and artists and things like that, comic book writers. We're doing some things in the winter where we're gonna come together like the Avengers and or the Justice League, and we're gonna answer some questions. So I'll probably do about 3 or 4 authors or creators at one time, and we'll go with like a set theme, and then we'll probably go for about an hour and a half and come up with 2 episodes for it. So that will be on the newsletter and my website, and I'll send out an email to all alumni because you guys get first dibs. So definitely be on the lookout for that. So I look forward to sending that to you and hearing your thoughts on some of the things that
Yeah.
people send in and that we'll talk about. I think that'll be really cool. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, you have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for hopping on with us. And I look forward to your TikToks and hopefully I'll talk to you really soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Anytime. Thank you. Well, you guys have a good rest of the day and I will see you later.